Hello, I'm Katty Kay in Washington.
And I'm Carlos Watson in California.
And welcome to When Katty Met Carlos,
a new podcast that looks at the ways the U.S. is reshaping its future, brought to you by the BBC World Service and OZY Media. Katty, wow, what a week it has been. President Biden's in the White House, and from this side of the country, it seems as though the inauguration went off smoothly.
I think so, Carlos. I started the day on Inauguration Day on Wednesday feeling rather sad, actually. I had to wade through security to get to my live position, which is so unusual. And this city really has been on lockdown for the last few days, so it all felt slightly dispiriting. But then by the end of the day, I felt they had really managed in extraordinary circumstances, and it was so difficult with COVID and the security to actually pull off something that did feel like a celebration of democracy and a peaceful transfer of power. And, all kudos to everybody up on Capitol Hill, Republican and Democrat, for managing 2 weeks after that attack to get just the building back in shape and looking great and put this whole show on. It was not a sure thing, was it, 2 weeks ago? But I think they did it.
They really did a nice job. And when we say they, as you were saying, not only Biden and Harris, but Republican members of Congress like Mitch McConnell and others I thought were important. And then even some of the pop culture figures. I think about people like Jennifer Lopez and Lady Gaga, or even maybe more importantly,
the
young
by
poet.
The way.
A great outfit indeed. Well, a number of people showed up and showed out, as they say, from Michelle Obama to others. A lot of folks, I think, stood out.
I hadn't heard that expression. I think I was on air and Lady Gaga came on and I said, perhaps unwisely on a national broadcast, I feel like I need to upgrade my outfit right now because I had been massively upstaged. From beginning to end, it was a good, colorful display. And it had that sense of symbolism that is so important about the transition from one administration to another, even though Donald Trump wasn't there. It felt like the baton was being passed because Mike Pence showed up and did the gracious thing, and the baton was passed from one administration that had been defeated to another that had won, and that is as it should be in American democracy.
So, have a good life. We will see you soon. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true.
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear.
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. We've learned again that democracy is precious. Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed.
So the celebration is now over. The honeymoon was very short and the real work has already begun. And what an enormous in-tray the new Biden administration has. We're going to devote this program to the challenges that he faces at home in America and abroad. How will President Biden and Vice President Harris deal with the coronavirus pandemic, the economy, racism, climate change, international threats? And to do that, we are joined by two veterans of two different Democratic administrations. Valerie Jarrett was a senior advisor to President Barack Obama, and she will join us later in the program. But we start with John McLaughlin, who served as deputy director of the CIA under Bill Clinton. He has 30 years under his belt in the intelligence community in the United States and is the perfect person to guide us to what President Biden has to look to abroad. Welcome, Mr. McLaughlin. I wanted to talk to you about, from a security point of view, watching the inauguration. How nervous were you?
I was quite nervous going into it, Katty. I think everyone was, when you consider, as many have remarked, that we had more troops in Washington yesterday than we have in Afghanistan and Iraq combined. That was perhaps excessive in a way, but that's probably what you need to do when you are not sure and when you've had what amounts to an intelligence failure in the case of the insurrection at the Capitol. So I think we as a nation, and particularly given the thinned out nature of our security agencies in the last days of the Trump administration, I don't think we had yet a very good idea of the extent of this threat. That will be one of the first things that the Biden administration has to really burrow in on and figure out how serious and prolonged this is. And I think they will.
John, if you were back in your old job and briefing a new president, as you did with then President-elect Bill Clinton, and I know you've done for several other presidents as well, what would be top on your agenda in terms of briefing the new commander-in-chief?
Right now, I would say the two things that are pressing, that with a time fuse on them are perhaps not a good metaphor, are both nuclear in nature. In the case of Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty signed by Obama in 2011, it expires within 2 weeks. That's the only forum we have for negotiating and managing the two nuclear forces of Russia and the United States, the world's superpowers in nuclear weapons. So he's got to quickly figure out a way to buy some time on that. It can be done with a signature, but I don't know that that's all been worked out with Putin yet. And then he'll have a longer negotiation. And the second one is Iran, which has begun, as Katty and many others have reported, reinstituting its nuclear program after Trump pulled out of that agreement. It's not an irreversible situation with Iran, but the clock is ticking again. Iran has a presidential election in less than 6 months, and in all likelihood, a hardliner will come to the fore, replacing President Rouhani, who is, in Iranian terms, a more pragmatic individual. So the clock is ticking on that one, and a lot of things have changed since the agreement was signed back in 2015. Including a more united and robust region that wants a seat at the table. The UAE, Israel, Bahrain, probably the Saudis as well. So it'll be complicated.
Can I ask you a 50,000-foot question? When President Trump came into office and stood up there in the inauguration in 2017 and spoke about America first, it was clear that he was going to have a more nationalist focus to his engagement with the world. And at that moment, a lot of us who kind of watch power shifts in the world thought, well, if America is going to retreat over the next 4 years, power loves a vacuum and somebody will step in and take some of America's role. With the benefit now of 4 years, how much has shifted in the global power balance? Behind the scenes, kind of quietly, did America lose some of its global supremacy and footprint because of a retrenchment by the Trump administration?
Absolutely, Katty. Just look at the China situation. Their economy and purchasing power parity is already larger than ours, not quite in nominal terms yet. When Trump pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that trade relationship with 11 other countries, mostly in Asia, the Chinese were not in it, but they immediately focused their attention on a competing agreement, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Program, which encompasses about a third of humanity, and they are now the major country in that. They've created the Infrastructure Investment Bank in Asia. They have their Belt and Road Initiative, which is a series of agreements on sea and land and air between China and all the way through the Middle East and Europe. So yes, I mean, there's no question that China has moved partly into the vacuum that was created when Trump stepped back from so many things, including the Paris Climate Accord, which Biden is now rejoining. Now, there's a limitation on that. I don't think China's very good at what we would call values-based alliances, like NATO, for example. No one really wants to be in an alliance with China, but they are caught up in China's power orbit, their economic orbit. And China's very good at pulling people together under basically economic agreements that are interlocking and that tie people to China. So, yes, Biden has an uphill battle here to regain some of our influence in the world that has slipped away. No question about that.
John, can we circle back to end this conversation back to Inauguration Day? And there wasn't much in Joe Biden's inaugural address, his 20-odd minutes of his speech, that talked to the rest of the world. But at one point, he did say that America was ready. He promised to, the quote was, repair our alliances and engage with the world once again. There is a trust deficit amongst America's allies, having watched the Trump administration and seen how America can elect a president like President Trump who retreats and enacts a nationalist policy. And some of America's allies are saying, yeah, it's great. We're so happy to hear that. We know two things. One, that Joe Biden is going to have an enormous domestic agenda that will take up an awful lot of his bandwidth, and we're not sure he's going to have the time to re-engage with the rest of the world. And a kind of, they don't say it out loud, but I hear diplomatic leaders in Washington say this to me, look, America did this once, perhaps they will do it again. How does Joe Biden go about reassuring his allies on both those fronts in specific terms?
I do think you are right. There is a trust deficit. We did such an extraordinary thing in electing Trump. And certainly I think most people would not be sure that we wouldn't do this again. The only way I can see that Biden can reassure the world that that is not the case is to deal internally here in the United States with the kinds of things, insofar as we understand them, that led to the emergence, the Trump phenomenon. And in a way, people have said Trump did us kind of a favor by showing that there is a huge proportion of the American population that either has not participated and benefited from all the prosperity of America, and, maybe more important, does not accept fact as fact without challenge. And so I think he has to address those issues. He has to do two things. He has to ensure through his policies that people see in the United States that there is a more equitable system of dividing up this great prosperity we have. And second, he has to be very honest with the population and gradually bring people to an understanding that you can believe what the President of the United States says. In a way, I think this is the greatest damage that Trump did, is taking us to a point where you could not believe what the President of the United States said. So he's got to reestablish that. The proof will probably be in public opinion surveys that show after a year or two what the United States thinks of Biden and his approach, his administration, his policies. The rest of the world sees that that's all working. Maybe they will not hold their breaths with such anxiety, but it's going to be understandable that they do for a while.
John McLaughlin, former Deputy Director of the CIA, pleasure to have you. And now joining us on the show is former senior advisor to President Obama and one of his longest-serving aides and confidants, Valerie Jarrett. Valerie, good to be with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you as well.
You know, Valerie, we just had a conversation with the former Deputy Director of the CIA, John McLaughlin, where he said that in order to keep America safe abroad, we had to make sure that America was safe at home. And he talked about the breach of the Capitol. He talked about the challenges in terms of facts and truth and people being able to believe the President of the United States. How worried are you, not only just about polarization, but about some of the other manifestations that we've seen over the last year and over the last 4 years in terms of people believing facts, people participating in the democratic process in a positive and constructive way? How do you think about that?
Well, I'm profoundly worried. I think that our country has been torn apart over the last 4 years, and I do believe the tone starts at the top. And I think on everything from facts about the COVID virus and the steps that we could take to contain it. And it's appalling that the United States has the astronomical death rate that we have, given our access to medicine and science. And a lot of it is just simply messages that were not clear from the beginning, which is why it was so important that President Biden signaled immediately that where the federal government has jurisdictions, masks are going to be required. It's just a simple evidence-based step we could all take to keep ourselves healthy. The insurrection that we saw trying to disrupt the orderly business of Congress 2 weeks ago was really a manifestation of an anger that has been fueled over the last 4 years, and frankly, longer than the last 4 years. This sense that there are, as opposed to being just facts, that there is editorial and there's entertainment and this veering away and people receiving information on demand as opposed to reliable sources of news, the way the news was when I grew up. And I think what you are going to see from the President of the United States, but is a responsibility of everyone, not just the United States, but around the world, is to try to listen without, or even disagree without being disagreeable, to hear perspectives that are other than our own, to try to find each other's better angels and show our own. And I think that that's a very important tone to have coming from the White House, but I think it has to happen at kitchen tables all around our country as well. We have a lot of healing to do. It's nothing that's going to happen because of one day celebration.
Valerie, it was pretty clear quite quickly that not everybody felt the same. Joe Biden's inaugural address was all about unity. He mentioned unity or unification at least 10 times. Within 24 hours of that address, you already had Republican senators like Rand Paul pushing back on what unity actually means, saying that actually Joe Biden was using his inaugural address to attack all Republicans, to equate all Republicans with white supremacy. If that is the reaction that quickly, clearly there's not going to be a honeymoon for Joe Biden, but it also gets to this fundamental tension in the country between unity and what unity means and accountability. And how do you get to unity without making some people feel that there has not been accountability, that perhaps, the sins of the past, and I'm not just talking about the attack on the Capitol, but police brutality to African Americans, the unequal condition of African Americans and Latinx people in this country, that those have been kind of swept under the carpet. And it seems to me there is a conflict there that Joe Biden is going to have to deal with.
Well, I'd say a few things. First of all, I don't think there's any attempt to sweep anything under the carpet. And one of the many things I respect about Joe Biden is his honesty and his willingness to be direct on the issue of racial equity. He is creating a new initiative, focusing on that, putting it under the responsibility of Susan Rice, who's the new head of the Domestic Policy Council. He will confront that issue head on, and as he has historically, in a very open and transparent way. As for Senator Rand Paul, I hope he will be an outlier. And there are always going to be outliers. But the fact that Leader McConnell, with whom the vice president has had, now the president, I've got to call him the president now. It's so good to say that.
It always takes a few days.
It does take a few days. With whom he has had a long and collegial working relationship, who worshiped with him that morning, who showed up at the inauguration, who stood up on the position of supporting democracy against a mob that tried to mount an insurrection. So I continue to believe that the majority of the people in our country are of good intent. And it doesn't mean it's not going to be a bumpy road. It is going to be a bumpy road. And I think the president is fully aware of that. The vice president is fully aware of that. But you have to start somewhere. And there was nothing in anything he said that supports the position that Senator Paul made about all Republicans being white supremacists. And I think we have to call that out when we see it. We can't let outrageous statements go unchecked. And I think so often people who are logical go, well, nobody would believe that. And so you don't counter it. And that's not the case. A lot of good people do believe when they're fed lies over and over again, they believe they're true. And that's the case with even the outcome of the election, which led to the insurrection that we saw. And many of the people who spoke out in in challenging the outcome of the election, after the insurrection, changed their vote, recognizing they'd gone too far. And so I think cooler heads will prevail under better leadership. But it will take time and it will take effort. And you can't brush anything under the rug. You have to be willing to put the spotlight on it and let it shine in the daylight.
Valerie, like President Obama, President Biden comes in with majorities in the House, a narrow majority in the Senate. And on one level, that looks like exactly what you'd like as a new leader, an opportunity really to bring alive some of the policy that you think is important and urgent. But on the other side, is there a real risk of near-term conflict within the Democratic Party? Could you see progressives like AOC and others want to go at a different tempo or maybe a different set of priorities versus President Biden? How real is that risk, do you think?
I think it is a risk. Look, when President Obama came in, we had control of the House and the Senate and still had a tough time getting legislation through. So it's important that the focus not simply be on reaching on to the other side of the aisle, but to really coalesce the Democratic side of the aisle too. Something I would mention that President Biden did in an extraordinary way during the course of his campaign. He managed to get every single candidate who was running against him to not only endorse him, but to work hard on his behalf. That did not happen in 2016. And so he is quite skilled at building coalitions, at keeping people feeling inside of the tent, at listening. And I do think our country is in a different place in time right now, where people have constituents or family members who have fallen victim to this illness, either by being ill themselves or by taking care of relatives or trying to take care of relatives, not being able to be present when people are in the hospital, seeing the job loss and the people who are struggling, who are essential workers. This pandemic has ravaged every part of our country, and it didn't start out that way. And I'm in New York right now. New York was, ground zero. And a lot of the country just kind of ignored what was going on because it wasn't happening in their neighborhood. But now it is, unfortunately. And so I think that presents a sense of urgency for the members of Congress to stay focused as well on both sides of the aisle.
Valerie Jarrett, thank you very much for giving us your time this week.
You're welcome. Take care.
So, Carlos, a lot of challenges and not much honeymoon time.
No, but, as you said before, what a level of experience he brings to this. Probably there's a level of comfort that he has. I'm not sure anyone has perfect comfort stepping in the Oval Office, but if ever there was someone who probably has some level of comfort around it, I bet it's Joe Biden.
Yeah, I mean, they've come into office and I think they've all had a bit of a wake-up call, particularly on the pandemic front, realizing that there really was not a plan for vaccine distribution. And perhaps the task in front of them is even bigger than they thought it was, even a month or so ago. But I do think what Valerie said there at the end might be interesting and perhaps hopeful, which is it is possible that Republicans realize things have to get done and that maybe there is going to be less obstructionism from the Republican side than there was under President Obama, because there is, for everybody, this mutual enemy. I mean, it's not the Cold War, but we have a national enemy out there, which is the pandemic. And that can concentrate minds and perhaps make people want to work together a bit more.
I do think you're right. I think we will see a level of what Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters said to me yesterday. She called it pragmatic patience. And she said to me, Carlos, I'm going to be more patient with President Biden than I normally would be. And she said, I'm going to constantly give him the benefit of the doubt. And where there are areas where I might be tempted to say he's not being progressive enough, I'm going to hold back and lean into his space. And I suspect that there will be that kind of honeymoon for Joe Biden, not only on his left flank within his party, but as you said, on the moderate right. And so some of the Republican senators like Mitch McConnell, who's not normally called a moderate, but the Senate leader on the Republican side, and Mitt Romney and others, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski. I think the president will get some warm help and warm reception as he tackles COVID and our economic challenges.
Yeah, I mean, after living in Washington for as many years as I have, I am always skeptical when people talk about the prospect of unity in this city. Disunity seems to be Washington's business. But let's be hopeful that in this moment of crisis, the new president's call for unity, not just as an end, but unity as a means, as a tool, as a weapon for getting things done, will be heeded, because nobody wants this pandemic to last longer than it has to.
It will be. As we close out, I have to tell you, even better than any speech by the new president or any member of Congress, did you see the young woman, Amanda Gorman, the poet, who gave that? I thought she might have stole the show, Katty. I thought that her words that America is not yet finished, I thought there was something beautiful and hopeful and fresh about that, much as she was as well.
And on that hopeful, optimistic note,
I'm back to my optimistic spot here. I love that. That's good. A little California sunshine.
we hope you've enjoyed this episode of When Katty Met Carlos, a co-production from the BBC World Service
and OZY Media. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review, tell a friend, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you, and we'll talk to you again soon.